Hello Orchid friends, how are you? Welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time watching my video, my channel is all about orchids. From what orchids I have, how I grow them, my thoughts on certain orchid topics, to what orchids in my collection are blooming, etc. So if you want to follow along my orchid hobby adventure, please consider subscribing to my channel and turn on the notification. Today in this video, we're going to look at my Phalaenopsis Germaine Vincent. So this is a cross between Violacea and Speciosa. And because Violacea and Speciosa are two species orchids, so the cross between two species would then be called primary hybrid if you are new to this orchid hobby. So I have two of these, and we're going to look at the first one, and then we'll talk about the second one and its latest development. So going back in time, beginning of 2019, in February, that's when I started to see it developing its two new spikes. And then a month later, it started to develop its buds. So altogether, from first sign of spikes to bloom, it's about 2 months. So on average, we're talking about 1 month for this orchid to start or to mature the spikes, and another month for the buds to mature to eventually bloom. Overall, this is a very rewarding orchid, even though this orchid does not have the Tetraspis or Speciosa characteristics with random petal sepal color distribution. When I first purchased this orchid, the photo shown was a random, color, like white petal with purple or light purple colors, but this one just doesn't have it because these orchids are grown from seeds, so it's not possible to know how the flowers would look like until they bloom, and not all the plants would have the same characteristics because they are grown from seeds, not merely clone. So this orchid is super fragrant, and I think usually the fragrance would last until early afternoon, like around 3 p.m. And this orchid is not requiring a whole lot of special care other than quarter strength fertilizer. And then once a month, I definitely only use just pure water to soak this orchid to wash away unnecessary buildup, salt deposits, or just anything that's within the cup. It's grown in semi-hydro, and because it already has roots at the bottom of the cup, which is inside the reservoir area, so I have a lot more flexibility to say, hey, this orchid, I may only want to give it quarter cup versus filling up the cup up until the drainage hole area. Because if you have no roots below the drainage hole area, then you kind of have to always make sure that your water level is high enough that the wicking is effective. But because there are roots at the bottom, so I can always just make sure adding enough water, and with through those roots at the bottom, this orchid can still properly hydrate itself. Okay, so after the 4 flowers have faded away, in June 2019, that's when I spotted that one of the spikes was putting out another bud. So I was obviously very thrilled, and it was around beginning of July 2019 that I started to see it opening. This orchid also had one last flower open after initial flowers finished last year, and just like last year, the last flower also is slightly smaller and the color is lighter. So I'm thinking that's just how the way this orchid acts, and a couple potential reasons. One is, well, because I did not use a strong dosage of fertilizer, so maybe toward the end of the flowering, this orchid simply is needing more fertilizer. or it could just be because this orchid is about to go into like a dormant state to rest. So when it's maturing its bud, it's just not putting out its full energy to make sure that the color is, you know, remain consistent. But overall, the fragrance remained the same. Even for the last flower that's smaller, the fragrance is pretty much relatively similar to the 4 flowers fragrance. And like I said, I have 2 of these orchids. The other one that we're gonna look at in a couple minutes, that one went through root rot issues in semi-hydro, so I unpotted it and used water culture to nurse it back to a point where I think I could then repot it back into semi-hydro. So that's exactly the kind of progression or steps I did, right? So after I bought that orchid, I unpotted it after a couple months, and then I put them in semi-hydro, and the number 2 simply did not like it, so it rotted a lot of its roots. So it went from moss to semi-hydro to water culture back to semi-hydro. So that is the progression that we're gonna look. And back to this orchid though, you can see in the video that it has many healthy roots inside the media, and that it really is the best scenario for semi-hydro orchids, because when they have healthy roots deep inside the cup, even into the reservoir, that's when you can really have that big flexibility in terms of water amount that you give. You don't always necessarily need to fill up the water up until the drainage hole. In other words, you don't have to always fill up the reservoir. You can always adjust the water amount because you have roots so deep down into the cup that even with just a little bit of water at the very bottom, as long as there is roots that can intake that water, this orchid would totally be fine. Now let's look at our number 2 here. So it rotted a lot of its roots. This is back 2018, beginning of 2018. And then I quickly put it into water culture using liquid seaweed as well as some fertilizer, in conjunction with some fertilizer to nurse it back to a point that I think it could be repotted back into semi-hydro. For me at the time, it was kind of a gamble too, because you never know how your orchid would react. But thankfully this one really shows signs of being happy in semi-hydro after the repot. And so a couple months went by, it grew a couple new leaves, and the leaves are getting bigger and bigger. So that's when I realized, okay, yeah, this orchid really is okay in semi-hydro. And pretty soon, beginning of 2019, it was growing more new leaves and new roots, and the leaves are getting bigger and bigger. So it was really, really cool to see that it's actually liking semi-hydro now. So I don't know what happened the first time around being in semi-hydro. It could be just that, you know, I didn't control the water amount well enough that the old roots just totally didn't like it. But anyway, so with this one, I also use quarter strength fertilizer, but this one I am thinking I would need to give it more fertilizer just to help it, you know, grow better. So this orchid now is working on its, I think, 3rd new leaves since I repotted it into semi-hydro. It has since lost 2 of its bottom leaves, but because the way that roots are growing and also the way that the leaves are growing, I'm not concerned about it losing its older leaves. So I have a question I want to answer, and that is, many subscribers know that I don't have a whole lot of orchids in water culture, even though I think water culture is a very fun method. And I have quite a few more orchids in semi-hydro, and most of them are doing really well, so I think it's a good method. But gradually though, I have been trying to use a different method where if I mimic semi-hydro but I have holes at the bottom, but then use outer cup to be the saucer or reservoir, so that maybe actually give me even more flexibility versus, you know, drilling holes on the side. So that's something I've been thinking. So if I have any more updates, I'll definitely share with how I do that approach and how that approach works in my environment. This is all I have for you today. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you would like to get more orchid related videos from my channel, please subscribe and turn on the notification. I want to wish you happy growing, and I will talk to you in my next video. Ciao!